Cam Robinson is the director of content for Elite Prospects. He joins us on Tuesdays, and this after a deadline about nothing. Cam, we sat there all day watching the Vancouver Canucks going, I wonder what they're going to...
Are they going to sell? Are they going to improve slightly? Are they going to rip off a second rounder for a winger if they believe in it? None of it happened.
Nothing. Your synopsis, sir, of what the Canucks did or didn't do.
Yeah, not as successful as a show about nothing, hey? It didn't have the same cachet. Disappointing, I would say, and I think the fan base has expressed that. I'm sure the management group would agree. Disappointing, right? They had some lines in the water, they had some irons in the fire that didn't work out, and I think their plan coming in, and you know, this was told to me as well, is that they were planning to wait out the market, to wait for Mikko Rantanen to either be flipped or extended by Carolina, whatever direction that went, and then capitalize on the teams that missed out on the top free agent rental score with Brock Boeser. And I think that the part of it was how long it took Dallas to extend him, close that window a lot for them. I think Brad Marchand being able to be had for a song at, cheap on the salary as well. And then, they didn't have enough time when Carolina circled back and offered up, the package that they had, that they, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've been told, is that nothing was like agreed upon. It wasn't like, hey, we have this deal in place, let's do it. And do we have enough time to turn around and flip that first rounder or that player coming back, whether it was Kotkaniemi or what, to turn into something now? Because I don't think the Canucks were interested in moving Boeser for futures, right? They wanted to move him for futures and flip them for now player. And so when the clock kind of was inching towards midnight, that just didn't make sense for them. A guy like Pius Suter, I think they overvalued maybe what he was going to be worth on the market. Really strong defensive player, has some goal scoring ability, but he is not big. He's not fast. He doesn't win a lot of faceoffs. He wasn't kind of a marquee player that teams look to add depth down the middle. He didn't fit the bill for a lot of teams, and I just don't think that there was very many good offers for him. I do think teams called about, Connor Garland, who has a year remaining on his deal. I think teams called about Tyler Myers because the defensive rental market was super light. We saw Columbus hold on to Dante Fabro and Ivan Provorov. I think that speaks volumes to where they are in their evolution. So I think they had opportunities to take hits out of the team and build something for next year and the year after that. And they chose to stay the course. And, they missed out on a seller's market, but maybe they just didn't have the assets to really sell. And that kind of comes down to some of these teams that are more proactive in the summer and bringing in players that they can recognize these will be assets for us at the deadline. And Vancouver obviously isn't in that part of their life cycle.
If that was where they eventually fell to, okay, we're not going to sell anything here. I'm surprised they didn't have a plan B locked and loaded, ready of, well, we should sprinkle a little sugar on them for the rest of the season at the very least and give them a little bit of a speed bump here. I mean, this team is starved for goals. Heck, Kuzmenko coming back, it would have been like anything to say, here's another chance at scoring goals. And they said no to that too.
Well, you look at what the price tags were, right? Are you going to go out and give a second-round pick for Anthony Beauvillier to bring a player like that back in and so he can, put up 2 goals down the stretch? So I think that if it was a softer market and you could just quickly throw a third-rounder at a guy like Gus Nyquist or something like that, or, a player that moved earlier to bring in and be like, hey, a little boost, help him out here. I think they probably would have done that. The value just probably wasn't there for him, especially down to the wire like that. Where teams recognize too, right? That it's like you've got someone kind of bent over a barrel at that point when it's 11:30 or whatever, 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern. So I think they got handcuffed. I think they tried to wait out the market to do a soft sell and a soft buy, and nothing came together. I think that they, getting a third for Carson Soucy. I talked about this on the show weeks ago. Is that I checked around with sources and everybody said, I think roughly a third, maybe a fourth at full freight, and so they did that. At least they did that, and I think that is indicative of how they view Elias Pettersson, the defenseman, that he's an NHLer and he should have a roster spot for this team right now and in the future. And so moving him out, at least they got a little bit of business done and opened up a spot for a young player. They're a younger team now overall. But overall, it was disappointing, and I think fans have a right to be concerned with the lack of this, kind of the frozen in time and space right now. What are they? They're not even in a playoff spot, let alone legitimately good enough to contend for a Stanley Cup right now, yet you're not building for the future at this point in time. So they're stuck in that mushy middle, and that's the biggest threat to any hockey team.
Well, speaking of mushy middle, they're asking us to believe that the prices were too low to sell, but too high to buy.
Yeah.
How are they asking us to believe that it's both ways?
Well, it depends on
I didn't
the
realize
asset,
he was
right?
in the comms department for the Canucks.
I'm just saying, like, that's what they're asking us to believe. Why should we believe it?
Well,
you know, I thought that the comment on Boeser on the offers, I thought that was out of line, to be honest with you. I know some people are just saying that he was trying to almost like be like, you know, hey, we value this player more than the offers. Well, you could have said that in a different way and framed it in a way that wasn't kind of putting a dent on this player that now you're attempting to re-sign and continue to have a relationship with. So I didn't like that. I didn't like the way he worded that. You could have come out and been like, we valued our players more than what the market was offering us. And so we thought we were going to hold on to them. We're still battling for a playoff spot. And in order to buy, you could have just pointed at, you know, X, Y, and Z. Hey, look at how much these teams are paying for these third liners, or that these guys with 10 goals on the season or whatever. We weren't willing to do that and mortgage part of our future, our long-term plan to try to get maybe a slight upgrade this year. So as far as PR goes, I thought it was mismanaged. As far as the deadline goes, I think that it was a product of, you know, their own assets and just the situation that they were in trying to wait out that market. It could have paid off. There were teams that were interested in Brock Boeser. I think that there were teams that were interested in giving up a first-round pick for Brock Boeser. Whether or not Vancouver wanted that, you know, or if they could take that and then flip it for a Josh Norris or something, I think that they would have been interested in. But that wasn't going to happen, and it wasn't going to happen so close to the deadline. So they were just kind of stuck. They were handcuffed, and whether that's not being proactive early enough before the deadline, or targeting players to buy that, you know, had a little more undervalue on the market that could value you, I don't know. So identifying, pro scouting, all those things kind of come into play for this, and nothing happened.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly that he words it differently, and there's no issue whatsoever, particularly if you're trying to get Brock to agree to a hometown discount deal here going forward. The one part that I just could not understand is that offers being poor for Boeser in a world where Beauvillier is going for a second, in a world where Kuzmenko is going for a third, and I think you hit it, Cam, that, you know, they weren't enticed by draft picks, even first round picks, that it needed to be something, either a 3-team deal or where they can take the picks, the futures, if you will, and reinvest it into right now help. Bruce Garriock in Ottawa said they were pretty well down the line on a Josh Norris deal. Did you hear anything there, and what would you have made of the fit there of Josh Norris?
I think it would have been a good fit overall. They need help down the middle, and, you know, obviously being best buddies with Quinn Hughes isn't going to hurt us, and locked up from several years wouldn't have hurt in trying to convince Quinn to stay long term here after his current deal expires in a couple seasons. Not to say Josh Norris is a perfect player, has a lot of injury history with that, and he comes at a big tag, but I do think that would have made a lot of sense. And I was told the same thing, that they were interested in him, among other younger, you know, kind of mid-20 centers that they were kicking the tires on. Again, I think that it was contingent on them moving out Boeser and getting those assets and flipping those assets. They didn't want to move their first round pick this year. I think that's been well documented, that they want to hold on to that at the expense of Melvin Fernstrom and that Rangers pick. You know, Fernstrom's been having a great time in the SHL since that trade too. So they obviously value their own first round pick this year. They don't value getting a contender's first round pick this year or adding another one in the late teens or 20s. I don't think that was going to do it for them. They wanted that young center, but they don't have the assets. They didn't have a Dylan Cousins to move over to get a Josh Norris, right? They don't have pieces off the roster that they can move that would entice teams like that. And so I think that they probably were talking more hypotheticals. I think that they had an idea in mind that they could probably get a first for Brock and then flip him. But as far as Ottawa was concerned, is that they could get a player like Dylan Cousins, who has far more upside than a first round pick that you're waiting 3-4 years on. It makes far more sense for Ottawa to do that, especially in their life cycle.
Yeah, and he scores a big game-winning goal against a direct playoff competitor last night, the Red Wings. Yeah. Was there any smoke on Petey, Cam? best you can tell.
Yeah, so I got, I reported it the day before, whatever, that they were once again listening on him. And some people in the industry side of things, came and texted me and be like, I don't think they ever stopped. And so I had a couple of teams though that fully, and not to say that they weren't picking up the phone when teams called. Obviously, you'd be derelict in your duties if you weren't. But I had one team just like outright tell me, Vancouver told us Pettersson's off the market after the JT Miller trade. And then I had another team tell me that, they said basically to Vancouver, like, we're going to keep making offers until you tell us to stop. And Vancouver was like, well, we're not looking to do anything right now. We're going to hopefully the trade here shifts the culture in the dressing room and it wakes him up and the Four Nations is going to all go off. And but I do think that there were teams interested. I don't think it was ever likely that he was going to move at the deadline. I don't think anything ever got close, but I do think they started listening once again, a little more engaged. They were a little more engaged in listening. And now, Pettersson seemed to have like a little come to Jesus moment there with the media last week. His play has not resulted in any production as of yet, but you could argue that it's starting to move in the right direction. The value of him around the league remains strong. I do believe that. I know that one team that was very interested in acquiring him earlier in the season, they told me, yeah, it sounds like he's back on the market, but we're no longer interested right now. But you come back to this in June, right? We see what he does down the stretch, good or bad. I think if he plays really, really well, that still might not mean that he's a Canuck long term. That might just buoy them to get a better package for him at the draft. And if he plays poorly, I do still think there's value around the league, that there's a number of teams that would still look at him and be like, we can fix him, right? It's that bad boy attitude. We can make him better, get him into our house. We can change him because it's not that long ago that he was still a superstar level player. So I think that if they want to move Pettersson before his no move kicks in the summer on July 1, I think that there will be avenues to do it. But again, the teams that are looking to buy an Elias Pettersson will be offering futures. They will not be trying to pull core pieces off their roster. This isn't Mikko Rantanen. They're not going to give you Carolina doesn't have Marty Necas to trade anymore. That was probably going to be the best offer they were going to get at the time. That Necas, Kotkaniemi, Jack Roslovic, and a pick was rumored earlier when they went and chose Rantanen instead. That was probably the best you're going to get as far as bringing in a player today that's going to impact your club. But could you move him to a team and get like a good young center like a Kent Johnson and a good young defenseman and maybe a pick, the guys that'll help you in 2028, 29? Yeah, I think you can. But is that going to be enough to keep Quinn Hughes around? Is that going to be enough to, change, or is that going to have to be that quick retool on the fly again if they decide to go that route, which I don't think they want to do. So long term, I do think that they prefer to keep Pettersson, but if offers are good enough in the summer, I do think they'll be listening.
Is Pettersson?
Hey, that is Jack Roslovic and his Rolex. Okay, we had that.
Is Pettersson to Carolina a non-starter for going forward? Because the Kotkaniemi piece looked like it was possible.
Yeah,
and Papa Stankoven, don't you want your prodigal son to return to Vancouver? Is that possible?
Well, and also, Cam, I saw something about, were the Canucks sore with the Hurricanes because of the Rantanen thing and being left at the altar at the last minute? Take on all of this on Carolina.
I haven't been told that in any way that there was any bad blood. I think that, Eric Tulsky's a straight shooter. I think that, and that's pretty clear, is that he, kind of the word around the campfire was that when he went to Vancouver and Colorado, it was an open book. It was, give me your best offer to acquire Miller, to acquire Pettersson, to acquire Rantanen, and then they decided. And I think that's very similar to how he operated with Rantanen when he reflipped him, that he went to Dallas, he went to Vegas, he went to Florida. He's like, give me your best offer for Mikko Rantanen, knowing full well that Rantanen was like, I'm only going to sign in 4 spots. I think he said the same thing, and Rantanen's like, I'm not going to extend in LA. The Kings were really interested. So I think he's very upfront about that, and it's hard to hold grudges when someone treats you, in a positive way like that. So I don't believe that was the case. No one's told me. Is Pettersson going to Carolina out of the question long term? No, I don't think so. That's a player that they've identified for a lot of years now that they would probably love to have on their roster. And when they moved out Necas, yes, Stankoven plays in the middle of the ice, but I don't think you view him as like, I'd probably prefer him on the wing myself. And, he's been utilized a lot like that in the NHL so far too. So if they could have an opportunity to bring in an Elias Pettersson in the summer, I think absolutely they'd be interested in that. And they're a very analytically driven team, and they see the upside with him and the skill package and the age and the contract, right? It's heavy, but it's long-term. They have that locked in, right?
Yeah.
I have no insight whether it would happen, but I do think that it's something that's not out of the question.
Does the center problem get addressed by the draft, or does it go past July 1st?
I think they're going to have to be creative. I think that, they will actively be looking to trade for a center in his mid-20s at the draft. I think that they will have to be active in free agency. They're going to have to add. They're going to have to find something here that isn't just a stopgap, that isn't just going out and signing Brock Nelson or something like that, a guy in his mid-30s for 4 or 5 years and having to battle against the market that everyone else is trying to add this player to.
How many teams want to... How many teams want to unload their decently productive 25-year-old center? What do the Canucks have to give that team?
That's the big question, right? It's not like they're flush with picks or prospects. They have a couple of, they have 3 or 4 good prospects. They can't afford to trade really any of them. They don't have a wealth of picks because they don't ever siphon money through their, they're sitting here after the deadline with all this cap space. They could have been a third team to get free picks and free lottery tickets, and then you parlay, right? Same with moving out some of these players where you talk about the market wasn't great. Could you have moved Poos Suter for a late second or an early third? It's that doesn't help your team, but those little chips add up that then you can use to get something that you need later on, right? And that's what we see all these good teams doing. We see Carolina constantly move back in the draft 5, 6, 8 spots, get themselves a free second or third round pick, draft more players, have all these prospects to go out and trade for a Jake Gensel at the deadline, right? To use 4 of their prospects that they don't have to worry about because they have 12 more that are comparable in the pipeline. Vancouver doesn't have that. They haven't been stockpiling assets enough to really go out and move the needle in that regard on the trade front. So you're absolutely right. That's why I mean they're going to have to get really creative. They're going to have to really trust their pro scouting and try to identify undervalued and underused players that they think could take a step up with their organization. And they're obviously making a big bet that Philip Hedl can stay healthy and maybe be a legitimate number 2 center.
Josh Norris, Dylan Cousins, Casey Middlestad all came and went as those young centers. Now, in some cases, Buffalo with Cousins, Colorado with Middlestad, they weren't particularly enthused with what they were doing recently. I go back to the 2022 offseason. The Canucks on the market for a right shot defenseman. They watched top prospect Brock Faber get dealt. Tony DeAngelo, Brent Burns. There were right shot defensemen, John Marino. There were right shot defensemen that came and went that summer. And the Canucks resolved themselves, okay, we better do this by the deadline. And you had the Philip Hronek trade. I think the opportunities that passed them by at this deadline, or that they just weren't able to satisfy because they were unwilling to pay the price, or they had this two-pronged, got to make the playoffs and build for the future. I think that's going to spur them to get very aggressive in the next window for a young centerman. It almost has to, as you guys say, right? There are only so many opportunities in the NHL calendar to go out and make these sorts of moves, and the draft is the next one. So as much as we look forward to all of your prospect reports, Cam, and we know you are the draft guy, trade market, it's too bad there's no floor, huh? It's too bad this is a remote draft coming up. Would have loved to have watched the activity around the Canucks table at this.
Hey, I got a little something for you. I did have someone whisper to me that maybe this is a one and done on the remote draft. Maybe, just maybe, it's a one and done, and we might get back. So fingers crossed on that regard.
Because of pushback from whom though?
Well, it's Yzerman, the guys who don't like being in public, doing all this business that have forced this, and apparently a lot of teams agreed with them. But you look at it big picture. That's the one thing the NHL draft had that the other big sports don't, right? Is everybody in one's area? Is when one GM goes and grabs another GM and they walk over to the sideboards and they're whispering. That's great theater, intrigue, drama.
Yeah, but they
to the draft.
I had a couple GMs, one in particular in Vegas at the Sphere. Day one wasn't even done and said to me, already regretting our decision to vote against this, in the future. And I was like, is it too late? Can we already pull the trigger? But, someone brought up the point, is that, there are some factions that are interested in it being in Montreal. It used to be in Montreal every year, right?
Every year.
To potentially have it in Montreal every second year, something like that. And then
Vegas and Montreal.
Year. That would be great. Or maybe you do a three city combo where it's Vegas, Montreal.
Yeah.
Give it to Utah. Vegas, Montreal. Give it to whoever. Right. Like,
right.
Whatever it is, I would love it to be a one and done. I'll be in LA to check it out anyways this year just to see how it goes. But yeah, hopefully we can get it all back together in the future.
And we look forward to your work there as well as your work with us each and every Tuesday. Thank you, Cam
Thanks, Cam.
Robinson.
Cheers, boys.